everybody, welcome back to the Spilling Tea Book Club. It's Russell.
And I'm Ryan, and today we're going to talk about our 7th book selection, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor.
I am so excited to finally talk to you about this, Ryan, because it's my fault we haven't videotaped because I have been crazy not scheduling this, but I am so excited to talk about this book with you.
It's been a busy time, but finally we're getting it out there and we can talk about this with everybody, and I'm super excited.
As you guys remember, we do a little bit of a process here. I'm going to tell us about Gloria and give a little bit about her background. Then Ryan will do a plot synopsis. We try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. We've actually already held the Zoom meeting for this book, which is it goes to show you how well I've been doing my scheduling. but then we have a Zoom meeting. So this time you're just going to get to talk to us in the comments down below. So let's get started on Gloria Naylor. So Gloria was born in New York City in January 25th. Her birthday's coming up in 1950. And she passed away in September of 2016. She passed away in the US Virgin Islands, which I thought was interesting. And she had a heart attack, unfortunately. So we lost quite a talent. Early too, because she was only 66 when she passed away. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was super sad. Now, what I found really interesting is that Gloria's family moved from the South. They were sharecroppers, and they moved north to get away from the segregated South and settled in New York, which, if you guys have read the Warmth of All the Suns, I can never remember Isabel Wilkerson's title, but The Great Migration got a lot of African-American people from the South around, and Gloria's family was the same. Her father was a transit worker, and her mother was a telephone operator. And interestingly enough, though, her mother was a voracious reader, and she is the one who inspired Gloria to be a reader. And she did very, very well in school. But in 1963, her mother decided to leave Harlem, where they lived. She moved to Queens, and she became a Jehovah's Witness. And she joined the Jehovah's Witness religion, and so did Gloria. She went with her, and she had all the intentions of going to college. And then the assassination of Martin Luther King occurred. And that inspired her to spend the next 7 years as a missionary in the United States as a Jehovah's Witness.
Wow.
And when she left after 7 years, there's a quote, and I'm not going to quote it correctly because I don't want to, but let's just say I think she left feeling like that religion had some issues. She said it was just not a good place for her, and it wasn't any better when she left than when she joined. And then she went to college. She decided to go to college. She became a telephone operator like her mother. Went to school, and she went to Brooklyn College. She started in 1981, and she read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and the works of Hurston and Walker inspired her to major in English. And then after Boston College in 83, she entered Yale University, where she got her MFA.
Oh, wow.
In African American Studies. And she went on. Her graduate thesis is what became the book Linden Place, I believe is the name of it. It's another novel set in this time too. But in 1982, she published The Women of Brewster Place. And then in 1983, she won the National Book Award for first novel for it. I believe she published 5 complete novels, but she was vital in putting together anthologies of African-American writers. And putting together short story collections and things from culture reference books and stuff like that. And that's what she did with her academic career. Not a lot is known about her personally outside of academia. She kept herself, I think, pretty, that part close to her vest. But she seems like a fascinating woman. And if you could say I would just say The Women of Brewster Place was a brilliant book. So yeah, maybe Ryan's going to tell us what it's about.
Yeah, so The Women of Brewster Place is a novel in stories. The way it's structured is that it's about 7 stories. It begins with a prologue called Dawn, and it ends kind of with an epilogue called Dusk, kind of framing the novel as like over the course of a day, though that's not really what happens in the stories in between. We follow 8 women in 7 stories, and these are really their stories, covering a lot of different women. They are all Black, and they live in this place called Brewster Place. It's in an unnamed city. On our Zoom call, a lot of us assumed it was New York City or somewhere around New York City. Others thought it might be the Midwest. It was never actually said where it was, but it's kind of a rundown neighborhood, like living community in a major city. And so the first novel is, or the first story is Maddie Michael, and it talks about Maddie and how she left the South and moved to Brewster Place. We get Etta Mae Johnson, her story about her son, Kiswana Brown, who's a woman who's kind of an activist. She moved from a wealthier part of the city to Brewster Place and actually changed her name. That's not her given name, is Kiswana. Lucelia Louise Turner, who went by Seal. We get her story and her daughter's story, and kind of that one was kind of a tragic one. Cora Lee, who had who was obsessed with baby dolls when she was younger, and then had a number of children when she's an adult. And The Two, which is about 2 women living together, and the prejudice that they face. And then the final story is kind of a culmination. It's The Block Party, where we have all of the stories kind of converging at a block party at Brewster Place. So that's kind of how it's structured. It's hard to go into a lot of details without giving away the whole story. But each story is connected. The characters do reappear a bit, but it's all centered around their shared experience as Black women in Brewster Place.
Yeah, it is going to be hard to talk. It's always sort of hard to talk about short story collections because they're sort of, disassociated from one another. But in this case, they're associated to one another and they can give stuff away if you're not careful. Yeah. So we will do our best. I thought, Ryan, the first thing that sort of sticks in my mind when I think about this book, and I don't even know if we've talked about it yet, is that there's this fact that Brewster Place is a street that at one time went through into sort of like the downtown. But a wall was built at the end of the street, and it basically blocked this neighborhood off from being part of the greater metropolis.
Right.
And that is very metaphoric for these women who different events in their life have blocked them off from different successes or their families or their pasts. And I thought that was really an easy metaphor, but it held a lot of power for me because they were all struggling to sort of get over a wall in some sort.
Yeah, that is really brilliant. And she does a really great job like tying the situation of Brewster Place to the lives of this whole group of people, of all Black women. Like this isn't just an individual story, though these are very detailed stories about individuals, but they're very universal in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I think it's in the Dawn section at the very beginning where the author describes how Brewster Place came to be and tells the whole story about it. And it started off as like a nice community, and it was inhabited by Mediterraneans. So I assume like in Italian Americans, yeah, Greek Americans, and they went and moved away. And the Brewster Place projects became dilapidated, poorly run, and the Black women were forced to live there in kind of this dead end. So that is very interesting.
Yeah, which is sort of the other thing about this sort of dead end metaphor is that these stories are all connected. The women do appear in a lot of them, but for the most part, the women are separate. There are a couple of instances, Maddie and let me make sure if I can get her name right. Maddie and Etta James, their relationship is close. We learned that. And of course,
Mhm.
the section, the two for the two women that live together. But the other women, all of them sort of come and go from each other's lives, but the relationships are never really built. And
Mhm.
it's sort of like Gloria Naylor is making this commentary on they have so much in their lives sort of just on their shoulders all the time that they
Mhm.
don't always have time to even befriend those who may be in similar circumstances to them. And
Mhm.
there's a sense of just, I don't know, loneliness a little bit through all of them because they all sort of need a friend, but there's just too much in the world going on.
Right. I agree, and I think that's what was interesting is that Brewster Place is a community of Black women living together, but they're not friends. And it really highlighted for me that they had these shared experiences, but they're very different people. Like they were forced into this community because of the color of their skin, because of their lack of wealth and opportunity, not because they actually wanted to live there or because they got along well. Like Maddie and Etta Mae were good friends, but the rest were kind of, you know, the two women in the two were very much kept apart from the rest of them, even
Mhm.
though some of them kind of defended them in that story. They really weren't a part of the community and were not allowed to be. Um, you could feel a lot of the prejudice among the people against Cora Lee just for having babies, you know, having a lot of children and not being a very good mother, maybe. And so that was kind of a barrier to some of them.
Yeah, Gloria Naylor does an amazing job of dissecting existing prejudices within that community itself.
Yeah.
And she sort of says, in a way, that it's just because society had all these prejudices against these women, but that didn't mean that that didn't seep into their own community where they had prejudices against each other. Coralie is a fascinating discussion because she's obsessed with these baby dolls, which then turns into an obsession with real babies, but she doesn't really want anything to do with them once they're not children. I'm sorry, not babies anymore. And the way the
Mhm.
dynamic of how people look at her as a mother and their understanding of her situation is one of like almost disbelief. They don't know what to do with her. And it's
Mhm.
not until someone who is completely outside of the community, Kiswana, who
Mhm.
comes into she chooses to join Brewster Place. And then she's the one that really makes a connection with Coralie, which I thought was really interesting. Sort of, Kiswana is an outside perspective, but still a Black woman. But
Mhm.
she comes in and she gives a different point of view. Her mother's review of Brewster Place when she visits is fascinating as
Mhm.
a dynamic, sort of a yin and yang from how everyone else is looking at the location.
Yeah, totally. I think that Cora Lee's story was probably one of my favorites, just because it ended on a more hopeful note.
Yeah.
And Kiswana is very much the character bringing hope. She's young and kind of the new generation. She's an
Yeah.
activist. She's trying to get these women to join a neighborhood association to unite against the landlord to get some basic things fixed. She's organizing the block party, which is kind of like a neighborhood bake sale fundraiser to raise money to get a lawyer to fight the landlord. And so those themes are going through. But yeah, it is very interesting how that outsider look at the situation who and she could theoretically leave at any time. She doesn't have to be there.
Yes.
She has a very different look. She has a very different view of the neighborhood, but she also is doing her part to reach out to people like Coralie.
That is true. Yeah. The other aspect of the novel that can't sort of not be discussed is that in general, men treat these women horribly. They have many instances where men, a few of them are driven to Brewster Place by men in their life.
Mm, right.
And the thing that the strength that these women have to sort of get past that, but there's also this underlying theme, this nagging desire for them just to find the right man that will finally help save them from this. And it was at times tragic. Maddie's has an instance where, you know, a man in her life really betrays her in such a way that changes the circumstances of her entire existence.
Yeah.
And it's someone that you would hope wouldn't do that to her. I don't want to give it away, but I remember feeling like this poor woman did everything she was supposed to do. And this man ruined it for her. And that happened to many of the women in this book.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, if any of them find happiness or some kind of success, it's in spite of men, definitely not because of them. And you do get a feeling like if there just weren't men in their lives, they would be way better off. I think the only named man really, or the only one that's really kind of a prominent character, is Ben, who is kind of a caretaker superintendent of the place. He's mentioned in the prologue as the first Black person to move into Brewster Place. And he moved into the basement and was hired essentially to live there and take care of the building. And he is featured more prominently in the two, in the second to the last story. And we also get some of his backstory because he's an alcoholic, and we really get some sympathy for him, which was interesting because he's the only man we get that from. So yeah, men played a very interesting role in this book.
And I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to ruin anything if you guys haven't read this book. What I will say about Ben is what you just said, Ryan, is true. He gets a different treatment. And then it's fascinating to see what Gloria does with him.
Yeah.
Even though we've gotten this sympathetic treatment from him. I think the two is probably my favorite story in the whole collection. Because it deals not only with racism, it deals also with misogyny, it deals with homophobia, and it deals with homophobia within not only the bigger community. As one of the main characters, the reason they moved to Brewster's Place is because she worked in Detroit and she lost her job because she was a lesbian, and so they moved here. And then you find out that they have to deal with homophobia within that community as well. It's really complex, and it's a very layered book because both of those women deal with their own sexuality very differently. Which, if you have read a lot of stuff about the queer community, about lesbians and gay men, and dealing with, especially in the 80s, where I think is where this book is set, trying to figure out how proud you could be of who you are. Is a big theme, and she just tackles that very well in that story, heartbreakingly so at times.
Yeah, I agree. I think the two is probably my favorite story as well. It's very strong. A lot of these stories, however, are very sad. Like they don't have happy endings.
Yes.
They don't. In general, there is a bit of hope in this book, but for the most part, it's a pretty sad story about these women, which you kind of would expect because their lives just are very hard.
Yes. I will say, I mean, just as a momentary, Gloria Naylor can write a sentence. She is a phenomenal writer. And for all of these characters being sort of given to us in these, Maddie really has the longest story. It's almost a novella, really. But she develops each of those women in so little time. I mean, you feel like you know them.
Yep, I agree.
Which I think is the strength of her as a writer. And that this was her first published book is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. I agree. It's really incredible. For a debut, it's amazing how effective and concise it is. It's not bloated. It's not melodramatic, though it gets very tense at times. Very, like, she's able to pull out emotion really easily, but it doesn't get like sappy or fake. And it feels relevant today.
Yes.
Like, you know, the only thing you might not notice is that they don't have cell phones, but like this isn't it's very universal. It's very kind of timeless. Like you could have put this at any time in the 20th or 21st century and it would work. So I give her a lot of credit for that.
Which sort of goes back, Ryan, to something I think we talked about on our Zoom call, is that this book in the street, though set probably 40 years apart, could have been 2 blocks in the same community.
Mm-hmm.
Because I forget the main character of the street's name, I apologize, but what she is going through is very similar to what these women are going through, 40 years apart, but
Right.
not really that far in time. But it just was amazing when you sit here and think about those 2 books sort of bookending a 40-year period, and the women dealing with similar issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tragic in a lot of ways. Neither of those books, that the street or Women of Brewster Place, there's a small amount of hope in the Brewster Place book, but there's not really much hope in either of the books because there's just been no change over this long period of time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the most fascinating parts about this book club is that we're able to kind of compare those periods and see the ways women have advanced, but also the ways things have not changed over
Yeah.
a century, 120 years. Many things are similar. So it's really fascinating especially to compare those 2 books and to
Yes.
look at some other books in the 80s um, where white women are not having these problems. And it's very apparent. It's
Yes.
really quite sad and it's shameful that Black women didn't have opportunities and still don't.
The best thing about reading both of these books, but the Women of Brewster Place, is that you and I, we read a lot. We try to read really diversely, and I think that this book fits into that canon of Black women writers that just just blow it away in just lyricism and just the beauty of their writing, but they tell terribly tough stories.
Mm-hmm.
And from Toni Morrison to Zora Neale Hurston to Gloria Naylor to Ann Petrie to we could go on and on, but the connection between these women is so powerfully felt. As you read them, you can sort of see the sisterhood of them through all
Mm-hmm.
of the narratives, and it's just really powerful and so well done, all of them. But this book really touched me in a way that
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a shame this book isn't talked about more as kind of like along the lines of Toni Morrison or like this literary canon. Like the Black women just don't get that kind of praise. And this really should be up there with so many other well-received books of the 20th century. And it's interesting that you mentioned at the beginning about The Bluest Eye. And that's such a reminder that like if The Bluest Eye didn't get written or published, I should say, even, this book wouldn't exist. Like we wouldn't have the Women of Brewster Place. And that's why it's so important to read these and make sure people have access to these, even if it might not be our story. Because if this has the chance to reach somebody who might not have known about it, and that inspires them to write their own version and get more people to see, like that's really important. So I'm so glad that we did read this.
Yeah, I've been so pleased at this book club's ability to read such different books, but we could really sit down and have a conversation about women in literature throughout the 20th century and kind of have a discussion. We could discuss the disparities between the novels written by white women and women of color. We can talk about the difference between the US and Britain. And we can do all of that and it's just amazing though that there is this sort of at the center of it, these women fighting these battles that they have been fighting for hundreds of years. And it may have different takes and different things, but it just seems to me there's such a connection between them, all of them that we read in some way or form.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
I agree. The only, I think, criticism I have of the book, and it's an excellent book, there's no reason not to read this.
yes.
I think it would have been stronger if it wasn't short stories. I believe that the stories are and characters are so strong that they're actually weakened that this isn't a full novel. It would have been, I think, more satisfying for me if these stories were all woven together in this place and kind of revealed over time, and you kind of dip in and out of these women's lives and see the connections instead of having these short stories that are broken up. I don't know why she made that choice. It's definitely not a bad choice. I think I just would have responded better as a full novel.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because I think what sometimes happened to me was, as I got away from the first story and the second story, I would lose those characters to the new story, to the new protagonist we were getting. And that was unfortunate, because a lot of the characters are so powerful throughout the book. But by the end, you really are into one story. And, I know that the last section tries to bring them all together a little bit, but I agree with you. I think there could have been some power if the block party was the overarch and then we just went out and came back into it. But I wonder, and I'm not an expert and I don't think that you'll know either, but you could surprise me, in that I can't think of when the novel as short stories started. But I wonder if it was just someone trying to do something different structurally that maybe hadn't been done a lot. I think I made a comment to you. It's like, we always give credit to Olive Kitteridge's this book of connected short stories that won the Pulitzer. But then you find out that books have been doing it way before her. And so you wonder what sort of impetus was for her to choose this. But I agree with you. It doesn't fault that it's short stories, but I think it could have been brought together better if the connection was there.
Yeah, I think it just would have been even more powerful. But
yeah,
I mean, the writing is so good. And maybe she just wrote it like in a week and wanted to get it out. I don't know. Like,
yeah, I wonder though, because I think she did the Men of Brewster Place, and she did Linden. I can never remember.
Linden Hills, maybe.
Linden Hills. I think they all have similar structures.
Okay.
So maybe I think that was just her thing. So
yeah, and maybe she just really liked it. I do like interconnected short stories like that. I think it's really fun, and I don't think probably women were doing it, or Black women for sure weren't doing that. So yeah, interesting.
But I will say I'm very happy I read this book. It has been on my shelf for some time, or my TBR, my mental TBR at least, and it was very much worth it to me.
Yeah, totally. It was definitely one of the best books we read for this book club, and one of my favorites of the year.
Absolutely. So Ryan, well, we're going to do teacups. I'm going to use my special spilling tea teacup that someone got me for Christmas. Oh, look, we're matching. Oh my God, I love it so much. Thank you, Ryan. How many teacups are you going to give this book?
I'm going to give it 4.
I'm going to give it 5. I do have some issues with it, but it blew me away as a debut novel. So it gets a 5 from me. It's a hard fight between that 4 and 5 sometimes.
It's true.
So
I think based on our Zoom call that I think almost everyone gave it 4 or 5.
Yes.
And I think the people who didn't appreciate it as much still got a lot out of it, and actually came away from our Zoom discussion with a different view of it. So that was really fun to see how people approached it, because this is a life that's not familiar to a lot of us.
Yeah.
And so we don't always have access to some of those things, and we don't always pick up on it. And that's why it's important that we read these, so we can know how other people live.
We can take a moment, Ryan, and just discuss that we had two people from Britain on our Zoom call, and their cover for this book was horrendous.
It's true. It was really bad. And not like it was a bad cover, like it didn't evoke the book at all. It just seemed like it was for a totally different book.
Totally different book. But yes, yeah, crazy. So Ryan, we're going to keep this going in 2021, are we not?
We have books picked out for the next year through December 2021.
Yes. So Ryan and I will actually be putting out a video in early January. I think we may actually even film it next weekend, where we will announce all 12 books for 2021. So you guys will know which book clubs you want to read, which ones you want to join, if you want to join the Zoom calls. We spent a good amount of time. We're trying to really make it diverse, interesting, things that we want to read, things that people have recommended to us. And we tried really hard to get a bunch of different perspectives this time.
Mm-hmm. We actually asked for recommendations from all the people who joined the Zoom call, and they've sent us a lot of recommendations. We've tried to cover a lot of different decades of the 20th century and a lot of different perspectives. So it should be really exciting.
I am really, really excited about it, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be a great book club. So I hope, you guys, that you decide to join us in 2021. Ryan and I are having a blast doing this.
Yes.
And we're very excited about it. So
our just a reminder, our January Zoom call will be a roundtable discussion where we just recommend a book to everybody on the call. It's a book that we think not enough people know about. Any gender, any country, any language, whatever. Just a book that you think somebody else hasn't read but should.
Yep, and that's what I'm excited about that, because I have a feeling both your and I TBR is going to explode.
I think so as well. So we'll have to find a way to share that in a future video, maybe, or
maybe we'll do a bonus video or something like that. And something, yeah, that will be exciting. So because
if these are unknown books, we want to get those names out there, because this was too good to like not be as well known. It's not that old. It's, this should be taught in schools. It's not long. It's a very quick book to read. You can just read a story at a time.
Yeah.
This needs to be on everybody's TBR.
Yeah. That's how I feel that way about a lot of them. But this one and The Street are the two that I'm leaving the book club with, being like, more people need this on their shelves. More people need to read this book. 100%.
True. Yep.
So
I agree.
Well, everybody, we have had a great time in 2020 doing this, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. So I'm going to say goodbye and wish you guys happy reading.
Bye. Happy reading. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.